Snow had been falling over Vancouver for 3 days straight when Thea Calloway walked into Trauma Bay 2 and found herself staring at the only man she'd ever loved bleeding out on a gurney. 8 years. 8 years since Bastien Voss had vanished from her life without a single word, no note, no call, no explanation. 8 years since she'd sat alone in her apartment on Commercial Drive, staring at a pregnancy test while the rain hammered the windows, waiting for a man who was never coming back. Now he was here, under the harsh fluorescent lights of Vancouver General's emergency wing, with 2 bullets in his chest and his blood darkening the sheets. He was here. Thea's hands were already gloved. Her brain was already running the math, BP tanking, pulse weak and uneven, probable pneumothorax on the left side. Her body knew what to do even when her mind had completely stopped. She stepped forward. She did what she always did. She saved him. 3 months earlier, Thea had been running on 4 hours of sleep and a large dark roast from the Tim Hortons on Granville Street, which told you everything you needed to know about the state of her life. She was 34 years old, a trauma surgeon at one of the best hospitals in the country, and she hadn't sat down for a meal that wasn't eaten standing over a sink in longer than she could remember. Her daughter, Rosie, was 7. Rosie had her mother's stubbornness and her father's eyes, gray-green and serious, in a way that sometimes caught Thea completely off guard, like turning a corner and walking into something solid. Thea didn't think about where those eyes came from. She'd trained herself not to. "You look terrible," said Dr. Kenji Abe, falling into step beside her in the corridor, coffee in hand, expression cheerful in the way only someone who'd slept a full 8 hours could manage. "Thank you, Kenji. Seriously, when did you last go home?" "I went home to do laundry doesn't count." Thea almost smiled. Almost. She pushed through the double doors into the staff lounge and went straight for the coffee machine. Kenji followed, because Kenji always followed. He'd been her closest friend since residency, the one person at Vancouver General who knew her well enough to push back without getting shut out completely. "Rosie called the nurse's station again," he said, more gently this time. Thea's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "When?" "Around 9. She wanted to know if you were coming home for dinner." "Marguerite told her you were in surgery." Thea poured her coffee and didn't say anything. Rosie was with Mrs. Adichie next door, which was fine. Mrs. Adichie made good soup and let Rosie watch nature documentaries past her bedtime. Rosie was fine. That wasn't the point, and Thea knew it. "She's fine," Thea said anyway. "She misses you." "I know." Kenji leaned against the counter and looked at her the way he sometimes did, not unkindly, but directly. "You've worked 6 of the last 7 days. You've covered 2 extra on-calls. You're running yourself into the ground, Thea, and I think you know it. What are you running from?" She didn't answer. She never answered that particular question, because the answer was long and complicated and sat at the bottom of 8 years of deliberately not looking at it. Her pager went off. Trauma alert. GSW. Multiple victims. ETA 4 minutes. She was already moving before Kenji finished reading it over her shoulder. This was what Thea was good at. This was the part of her life that made sense. Inside an oar, everything had a protocol. Chaos resolved into procedure. Bleeding stopped or it didn't, and if you were fast enough and precise enough and you didn't let your hand shake, usually it stopped. She'd built her entire life around the clarity of that. The clean, knowable logic of a body in crisis and what to do about it. Outside of this building, very little made sense to her anymore. She sprinted toward Trauma Bay 2, snapping her gloves on, calling out orders before she even reached the doors. Her team moved around her like water around stone, practiced, fast, trusting her the way they always did. Thea had that reputation. Unshakable in a crisis. Iron hands, ice nerves. She'd built that reputation deliberately, from the ground up, because once upon a time she had been anything but. The paramedics came through the doors at speed, gurney wheels screaming against the linoleum. "Male, mid-30s, the lead paramedic said, voice tight. 2 GSWs to the chest, 1 to the shoulder. BP 65/40, pulse ox dropping. Lost consciousness 2 minutes out." Thea stepped forward, and then she saw his face. The room didn't go silent. It kept screaming, monitors alarming, her team calling out vitals, the rattle of instruments on the tray beside her. All of it kept going. But inside her own head, something went absolutely, completely still. Bastian Voss lay on her table. Bastian, who had been 27 years old the last time she'd seen him, standing in the doorway of her apartment with his jacket half on, and his face wearing an expression she hadn't been able to read then and still couldn't now. Bastian, who had kissed her forehead and said he'd be back in an hour and had never, not once, come back. For 3 full seconds, Thea Calloway, the surgeon who didn't flinch, who'd kept her hands steady through things that made residents pass out, could not move. Then her training hit like a wave, and she moved. Get me 2 large-bore IVs, push the fluids, and someone get me a chest tube tray right now. Her voice came out exactly the way it always did, calm, controlled, giving nothing away. She worked. She didn't think about anything except what was in front of her. The wounds, the bleeding, the fragile, stupid, beating heart of a man who had walked out of her life 8 years ago and apparently decided to come back by nearly dying on her table. Later, she would not be able to explain exactly what she felt during those 2 hours of surgery. Not grief, not rage, not the shattering relief she might have expected. Something more complicated than any of those. A kind of grief that had already been lived through and survived. A scar that had been pressed on unexpectedly, the ache of something long healed being asked to prove it wasn't still tender. She closed him up. She stabilized him. She saved his life. Then she went to the scrub sink, turned on the water so nobody could hear her, and stood there for 45 seconds with her forehead against the cold tile, breathing. 45 seconds. That was all she allowed herself. Then she dried her hands and went back to work. Bastian Voss woke up 31 hours later. Thea knew because the ICU nurse paged her, because she'd left specific instructions to be notified. Professionally, she told herself. Standard protocol for a complex surgical case. She walked the long way around the 4th floor, past the windows overlooking the courtyard where the ornamental pear trees were losing their leaves in the November wind, and she gave herself exactly that long to decide how she was going to handle this. She was going to be professional. She was going to be a doctor. She was going to walk into that room, and she was not going to say a single thing that wasn't medically relevant. She pushed open the door. Bastian was awake, pale as the pillow behind him, a line of dried blood still visible near his temple, where they hadn't quite gotten it all, tubes in his arm, and a monitor beeping steady at his bedside. His eyes found her the moment she came through the door, and something moved across his face. Not surprise. Almost like he'd been waiting. "Thea," he said. His voice was rough, wrecked by the intubation. "Mr. Voss." She went straight to the chart at the foot of the bed, kept her eyes on the numbers. "You had 2 bullets removed from your chest cavity and 1 from your shoulder. The right lung sustained significant damage and required a repair. You lost a considerable amount of blood. You'll be here for a minimum of 2 weeks, possibly 3, depending on recovery." Silence. "Thea, you'll want to discuss the specifics with your attending physician. I performed the emergency surgery, but I won't be your primary care physician going forward." She clicked the chart closed. "Do you have someone we should contact? Family?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't have family. A colleague then. Someone, I need to talk to you." She looked at him then. She hadn't meant to, but she looked at him, and the 8 years collapsed a little at the edges, the way old photographs do. The color bleaching out, the edges going soft. He looked older. He looked tired in a way that went past the hospital bed, past the blood loss. He looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time. "You need to rest," she said. "Whatever else you need can wait." "It's waited 8 years," Bastian said quietly. "I think that's probably long enough, don't you?" Thea walked out of the room. She didn't tell Rosie. Of course she didn't tell Rosie. Rosie was 7 and Rosie didn't know she had a father. Not in the real sense, only in the abstract sense that Thea had carefully, honestly explained when Rosie was 4 and started asking questions. Some families have a mum and a dad and some don't. Ours is just us. And we're enough. Rosie had accepted this with the pragmatic ease of a child who had never known anything different. She'd never pushed for more than Thea offered. She was in some ways the most emotionally intelligent person Thea knew, and she was 7 years old, and sometimes that made Thea feel an absurd amount of guilt about things she couldn't quite name. Thea went home that night. She went home and she made pasta, the kind Rosie liked, with butter and parmesan and the little shell shapes that Mrs. Adichie called the good ones. And she sat across the kitchen table from her daughter and watched her talk about a project on Arctic foxes that she was apparently very invested in. They turn white in winter, Rosie said seriously, twirling pasta around her fork with surgical precision. Like, completely. So predators can't see them. It's called camouflage. I know what camouflage is, babe. I'm going to make mine a diorama. With real fake snow. Real fake snow, Mrs. Drummond said we could use cotton balls. Thea smiled. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, the way she didn't always let herself. Because when she looked too long, she saw things she wasn't supposed to see. And she thought about the man lying in the ICU 4 kilometers away, breathing through repaired lungs that she had repaired with her own hands. I need to talk to you. She'd heard that sentence. She'd been hearing it for 8 years in one form or another, in the version of it she'd played in her own head, the version she'd rehearsed 100 different answers to in the shower, or on the SkyTrain, or in the in-between minutes of a long surgery. She'd imagined screaming it back at him. She'd imagined being cold and being devastating and being completely unmoved. She had not imagined standing at the foot of his hospital bed, feeling something she couldn't name and walking away without saying anything at all. Mom, Rosie said. Thea blinked. Sorry. What? Rosie studied her with those gray-green eyes. You went somewhere just thinking about work. Rosie considered this. Then she went back to her pasta. You do that a lot lately. Thea didn't answer. She reached across the table and tucked a piece of hair behind Rosie's ear instead, and her daughter let her, which meant she was tired. When Rosie was awake and energized, she dodged affection like a very small, very opinionated cat. Later, after Rosie was asleep, Thea sat on the couch with a glass of wine she didn't drink and her phone in her hand and Bastian Voss's patient file pulled up on the hospital portal. She read it the way she'd read 100 patient files before. Systematically, looking for the thing underneath the thing. He'd been brought in by ambulance after a 911 call from a parking structure in Yaletown. No witnesses, no suspects. The police report attached to his file listed his occupation as private security consultant, which Thea recognized immediately as the kind of description that told you everything by telling you nothing. She thought about the quality of the suits she'd seen him in 8 years ago. The car. The apartment he'd taken her to once in Gastown, beautiful and bare and somehow untouchable. The apartment of a person who didn't want to leave evidence that they lived there. She'd been 26, and she'd thought she was in love, and she'd been too young and too hopeful to ask the right questions. She closed the portal. She finished the wine. She went to bed and she didn't sleep. She went back the next morning. She told herself it was clinical. She went to his room early, before rounds, when the corridor was still quiet and the winter light came flat and gray through the hallway windows. She knocked once, pushed the door open, and found him awake, which she'd somehow known he would be. You came back, he said. I'm your surgeon of record until you're transferred to a primary team. She pulled the chair to the bedside and sat down, because standing felt like a statement she wasn't ready to make. I have questions. Ask. Who shot you? Something shifted in his expression, not evasion, exactly, but the practiced caution of someone who'd learned to measure what they said before they said it. People I used to work for. I left. 18 months ago. They weren't happy about it. Thea looked at him steadily. And what is it that you used to do? A pause. He met her eyes. Things I'm not going to tell you in a hospital room because it would put you at risk. But I'm not doing them anymore. Another pause, and something underneath the caution. I haven't been doing them for a long time, longer than 18 months. She let the silence sit for a moment. Outside, a cart rattled past in the hall. The monitor beeped, steady and indifferent. Why Vancouver? She asked. Bastian was quiet for a long moment. Because I knew you were here, he said finally. I've always known where you were. The air in the room did something strange. She stopped, looked for the word, couldn't find one that fit. I know, he said. I know how that sounds. Do you? I didn't come here to. I wasn't going to reach out. I just needed to be somewhere that felt. He paused again. and this time it felt genuine, the pause of someone searching for accuracy rather than strategy. Somewhere that felt like it could be real, after everything. Thea stood up. She needed to stand up. She went to the window and looked out at the parking structure, the gray November sky, the mountains barely visible behind the cloud cover. "You have a daughter," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. The words came out of somewhere underneath her control, and once they were in the room, she couldn't take them back. The silence that followed was unlike anything Thea had experienced in a long time. "What?" Bastian's voice had changed. All the careful neutrality was gone. "Thea, her name is Rosie." She kept her eyes on the window. Her voice was steady. She'd been a surgeon for long enough that she could make her voice do what she needed it to do. "She's 7. She's healthy. She likes Arctic foxes and hates mushrooms, and she's going to be smarter than both of us." She heard the shift of him trying to sit up. The monitor stuttered as his heart rate changed. "Don't," she said, turning around. "You'll pull your drain. Lie still." He lay still. His face was completely unreadable, which she recognized as a different kind of overwhelm, the kind that went too deep to show on the surface. "Why didn't you?" "Because you were gone." Her voice came out even. "You were gone, and I had no way to reach you, and I had to make a decision about my life. So I made it." She looked at him directly. "She doesn't know about you. She knows she has a father somewhere. She knows the basics, but she doesn't know you. I want to. I know." She cut him off, not unkindly. "But what you want right now doesn't matter as much as what she needs. And right now she doesn't need to know any of this until we decide how to handle it. Can you agree to that?" He held her gaze for a long moment. "Yes," he said. 2 weeks passed. Bastian was a good patient in the technical sense. He didn't fight the nursing staff. He did the physio exercises without being prompted. He ate what they brought him. He was a harder patient in every other sense, because word got around that Trauma Bay 2's surgeon was visiting outside of clinical necessity, and Kenji started giving Thea looks across the nursing station that she refused to acknowledge. "He's a patient," she said, on the 5th day, unprompted. "I didn't say anything," Kenji said. "You were about to." Kenji put down the chart he was holding and looked at her properly. "Thea, be careful." "I'm always careful. That's the problem." She didn't have an answer to that, so she walked away. She and Bastian talked. That was what surprised her most. Not the anger, which was there, sitting like sediment at the bottom of everything, but the ease of the conversation once they got past the necessary pain of it. He told her what he'd been doing for the past 8 years. He told her slowly, in pieces, over multiple visits, and she understood by the 2nd day that he was being careful, not protecting himself, but calibrating how much she could take at a time. He'd been working for a criminal organization since he was 19. Not by choice, not initially. He'd been pulled in through his uncle, who had debts, and by the time Bastian understood what he was actually part of it, was too late to walk away cleanly. He'd met Thea when he was 27, when he'd already been trying to find a way out for 2 years. He'd fallen for her in the way that probably only happens when you're living in a world with no softness in it at all, and someone appears who is entirely the opposite of everything around you. And then his employer had found out, had threatened her specifically, name, address, description, as leverage. "So you left," Thea said, day 6. "I disappeared," he said, specifically, on purpose. "So there was nothing connecting you to me. So they had no reason to use you. You could have told me. If I'd told you, you would have wanted to help." He looked at her evenly. "You would have, Thea. Don't tell me you wouldn't." She didn't tell him that, because he was right, and she hated that he was right. "You still should have told me," she said instead, "about all of it, before. You should have told me what you were." "Yes," he said, "just that." No argument. She left that day without saying anything else, and she drove home through the early winter dark of Vancouver. The Lion's Gate lit up in the distance, and she cried for 20 minutes in the parking garage of her building before she went upstairs and made dinner. Not for him, or not only for him, for the 26-year-old version of herself who'd sat alone with a pregnancy test and thought she'd done something wrong, thought she hadn't been enough, thought that was the reason. For all the years she'd spent running from a question she'd never been able to answer. She cried for that. Then she dried her face and went upstairs to her daughter. On a Tuesday in late November, Rosie asked again. They were in the car, coming home from Rosie's swimming lesson, and Rosie had been quiet for most of the drive in the particular way she got quiet when she was working something out. Thea had learned to wait it out. "Mom," Rosie said. "Yeah, at swimming today, Isla said her dad taught her how to dive." A pause. "Is my dad anywhere?" Thea kept her eyes on the road. Burrard Street, wet with rain, the headlights of oncoming traffic streaking across the windshield. "Yes," she said carefully. "He is? Where?" "Close." She heard her own voice. How strange it sounded. Actually pretty close. Rosie was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "Does he know about me?" "He does now." Another silence. Rosie was 7, but she had always processed things with an unhurried seriousness that sometimes made Thea forget she was talking to a child. "Is he good?" Rosie asked finally. Thea thought about that. About a man who had made terrible decisions for complicated reasons and was trying to unmake them. About the look on his face when she'd said her name is Rosie. The look of someone receiving something they hadn't known they'd been waiting for. "I think he's trying to be," she said honestly. "I think that counts for something." Rosie appeared to consider this. Then, okay, just okay. The extraordinary equanimity of a child who trusted her mother's word. Thea gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and drove them home. She brought Rosie to the hospital on a Saturday morning. She'd planned it carefully, told Bastien in advance, gave him time to prepare, briefed the nursing staff. She brought Rosie in her favorite red coat and let her pick a muffin from the second cup in the lobby. Rosie held the muffin bag with both hands and looked around the hospital with curious, unafraid eyes. "Does it smell like this everywhere?" she asked. "More or less. I kind of like it. Most people don't." Rosie shrugged. "Most people are wrong about things." Thea almost laughed. She knocked on the door of room 412 and pushed it open. Bastien was sitting up in the bed, the standard-issue gray blanket folded neat across his lap. He'd asked one of the nurses to help him look less like he was about to fall apart, which Thea knew because the nurse had told her. He looked pale and held together and completely terrified in a way she suspected only she could see. Rosie stopped in the doorway and looked at him with her gray-green eyes. His eyes, objectively, unmistakably, and didn't say anything for a moment. "Hi," Bastien said. His voice came out careful and quiet. Rosie looked at him for another long moment. Then she walked fully into the room and stood at the bedside and said, with great seriousness, "Mom says you got shot." "I did. Does it hurt?" "Not as much as it did." Rosie considered this, tilting her head slightly. "My mom fixed you." "She did." Bastien's voice had gone a little unsteady. "She's very good at her job." "I know," Rosie said with simple, total confidence. "Then I'm going to be a surgeon too, or possibly a marine biologist. I haven't decided." Something happened on Bastien's face then. Thea had seen a lot of human faces in a lot of moments of crisis and relief and grief, and she knew what it looked like when someone was trying to hold themselves together across the smallest possible surface area. He was doing that now. "Both seem like good options," he said. Rosie looked at him for another moment. Then she climbed up onto the visitor's chair, settled herself in, and opened her muffin bag. "Okay," she said. "Mom said I could stay for an hour." "I'd like that," Bastien said. Thea stood in the doorway and watched her daughter talk to her daughter's father about Arctic foxes and the structural integrity of cotton ball dioramas, and she thought about everything it had cost to get here. The years, the silence, the choices that had felt like no choice at all, and she thought, we are going to be okay. Not perfect, not clean, not the way she'd imagined things would be when she was 26 and hopeful and didn't know yet how much things cost. But okay, survivable, maybe even good. Bastien was discharged on a Thursday in December, a week before the city started its serious push into Christmas. Thea drove him to the small furnished rental he'd arranged in Mount Pleasant. Nothing much, just clean and temporary, a placeholder for something more permanent that hadn't been decided yet. He stood on the sidewalk outside with his discharge papers in one hand and looked like a man who didn't entirely know what to do with himself when he wasn't bleeding. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it. I was doing my job." "Thea," she looked at him. The December air was cold and smelled like wood smoke from somewhere nearby, and the last of the daylight was going pink behind the mountains. "I know what you're going to say," she said. "I'm not sure you do. You're going to say you want to try again. You're going to tell me you've changed, that you're out, that you've spent 8 years. I'm going to say," Bastien said quietly, "that I don't expect anything, that I know what I cost you, and I know I can't give those years back, that I'd like to know my daughter if you'll let me, and I'll take whatever form that takes." He paused. "And that I'd like the chance to show you who I am now. Not to ask for anything back, just to show you. Because you deserve to see it." The December wind moved between them. A car passed on the street behind her. "Rosie has swimming on Saturday mornings," Thea said finally. "She's been wanting someone to go with her." Something very quiet moved across Bastien's face. "I'll be there," he said. The following spring, Rosie stood at the edge of the pool at the Hillcrest Community Center and looked down at the water with the expression of someone preparing to do something that frightened them, but had decided to do it anyway. Bastien crouched beside her, one hand light on her shoulder, saying something Thea couldn't hear from her spot in the bleachers. Rosie looked at him. He looked at her. Then she jumped. She surfaced laughing, water streaming off her face, and looked up at Bastien with an expression that cracked something open in Thea's chest. Pride and triumph and a complete, uncomplicated joy. "Did you see?" Rosie called up. "I saw," Bastien said. His voice carried across the water. Thea watched from the bleachers with her coffee going cold in her hands, and she thought about the surgeon she'd become, and the mother she was, and the woman she still was underneath all of that, the one who had loved someone and been hurt by it, and had chosen to keep going anyway, in the only way she knew how. She'd built a good life from the wreckage of that night 8 years ago. She knew that. She didn't need to minimize it. But watching Bastien look at their daughter the way he was looking at her now, like she was the most important thing that had ever happened to him, which she absolutely was. Thea let herself believe, for the first time in a long time, that good didn't have to be the ceiling. She finished her coffee. She went down to the pool. 3 years later, she still worked at Vancouver General. She still ran on Tim Hortons and not enough sleep, but less so, less running from it, more choosing it, which turned out to be a different thing entirely. Bastien had an apartment 2 streets from their house in East Van, close enough that Rosie could walk, far enough that nothing had been rushed or forced. He'd been thorough about leaving his old life behind. Thea had watched him do it methodically, the way he did most things, without drama. She didn't know all the details, and she hadn't asked for all of them. What she knew was that he showed up every Saturday morning, and some Tuesday evenings, and every school event that Rosie invited him to, and that Rosie had stopped saying, "Some families are just us," and started saying "my dad" with the easy casualness of a child who'd integrated a new fact about the world. The first time Thea heard her say it, "My dad says the same thing," she'd had to excuse herself to the kitchen for a moment. She wasn't sure exactly when she'd let Bastien back in. It hadn't been a decision so much as a gradual lowering of something she'd been holding for a very long time, a careful, incremental choice that happened in small moments rather than one large one. A conversation in his car outside her building that went 2 hours longer than intended. A Sunday morning where he'd shown up with groceries and made breakfast while she slept in for the first time in years. A moment at Rosie's school concert where they'd sat side by side in the little plastic chairs, and Rosie had performed her part in the winter program with absolute seriousness. And afterward, without thinking, Thea had reached sideways and taken his hand. She'd kept it for the rest of the concert. He'd never mentioned it. Neither had she. But some things didn't need to be said to be true. She'd learned that, eventually. She'd learned a lot of things, eventually. That choosing to save someone didn't mean you weren't angry at them. That forgiving someone didn't mean pretending the years hadn't happened. That love wasn't the absence of hurt, but the willingness to stay after it. She'd spent 8 years being careful. She'd built something real and good, and entirely her own from nothing at all. And she was proud of it, and she didn't regret a single day of it. But she was done being careful out of fear. She was done keeping something at arm's length, because she was afraid of what it would cost her to reach for it. Some things were worth reaching for anyway.